The role of the director is really to create the vision, to communicate, to tell the story, communicate the perspective that really becomes an enormously large part of the very voice of our civilization. So if we can make that argument very clear to people, that when you discriminate against women directors, you are effectively silencing and censoring half of the population.
You're listening to The Other 50%, a herstory of Hollywood. I'm Julie Harris Walker. This is the show where we speak with successful women in Hollywood and hear their stories. This week I spoke with Maria Giese. Now she's a film director, and almost more importantly right now, she's an activist, an agitator. She's the one who got the ACLU to pressure the EEOC to investigate Hollywood for the discriminatory hiring practices of female directors. That is a pretty big deal. She has all the data, she knows all the history, she has enormous passion. This was an education. Here, have a listen.
You know, I had, always wanted to be a director, like so many of us, since I was, very, very young. And I think I was really inspired by the films of Lena Wertmuller, like Swept Away, which I think I saw when I was 13 years old. And I had been seeing a lot of, really fantastic art house films because I grew up in Provincetown, Massachusetts, where they had a cinema called The Movies. And they played all of the most wonderful European films, and Pasolini and Visconti and Fellini and all the great German directors and Kurosawa and just on and on. So anyway, I fell in love with art house films very early on. And then when I saw Lena Wertmuller's, I think it was really Swept Away, I just thought that is definitely what I want to do.
So Maria studied. She went to film school. She made a bunch of shorts. She was very successful. She won a bunch of awards while she was in school, and she wrote some screenplays outside of school that she got paid for.
And I got signed, as soon as I started winning awards for my shorts, I got signed by an agent, and then I finished the screenplay for my film When Saturday Comes while I was in my final year of graduate school. So by the time I got my degree, I was already very close to being greenlit to direct When Saturday Comes, and the producers in LA were able to get it to Capitol Films, which was really this fantastic company that was run by three women, notably Sharon Harrell and James Barkley, and they were making the best films that were, as far as I'm concerned, that were coming out of Britain at that time, and just had a really, really beautiful slate of films. And
so that was the UK Capitol Films, not the US Capitol Films?
That's right, the UK Capitol Films.
Yeah.
It was just a great year. Francis Ford Coppola handed me my degree and told me good luck, and a few weeks later I was flying off to Norway and then to London, and then I got greenlit, and
so you were launched.
I was launched, and it was really, really an amazing time of my life. And there was really no, I wasn't getting much purchase, much headway in LA, in the industry, in Hollywood. I would go to meetings and people were not interested in talking to me about directing. But when I was in Norway, when I was in Paris, when I was in London, and I was taking, meetings, everybody took me completely seriously. There was not, they really did not have the same kind of, misogynistic attitude toward a woman director as they did. I mean, the fact that I had made these films, that I was, had written these screenplays and was intending to make When Saturday Comes, was, taken seriously. There wasn't a credibility issue there. And the meetings went really, really well. And then Sharon Harrell and Capitol Films went ahead and greenlit us. So by the fall of 1995, I was in active pre-production. And that winter we were shooting, and by May the film was at Cannes.
Wow.
And I was then signed at the William Morris Agency in the UK with Steve Kennis, who had been was just a legendary agent in the UK who had, Richard Harris and Peter O'Toole and just all the most fabulous actors in the UK.
Wow.
And then he got me to sign with William Morris. I was really on the fence about signing at William Morris in LA, but I did anyway because Steve Kennis really wanted me to, because he was heading up William Morris in the UK. This guy called Todd Harris wanted to sign me, and Todd had, Billy Bob Thornton and Robert Duvall and Diane Lane and, some big clients. And he really wanted to sign me. He really loved When Saturday Comes, and he thought he could get me a studio film within a few months. And so I went ahead and signed with William Morris, and he sent me out to some meetings, and I read a lot of scripts and so forth. And then I was writing my own scripts and getting attached to other projects and so forth. But nothing seemed to happen. I mean, first of all, it wasn't like I shouldn't have come back to LA. Going to meetings at the studios in LA and these different production companies wasn't as comfortable as going to the meetings in Europe. I think there was just a bias against women and women directors.
What did that feel like in the meeting?
Well, it was just that you were pretty sure it wasn't going to happen. And it was like that from the get-go. So you'd go into these meetings in Europe and you'd have these fascinating conversations, and you had the feeling that you were being taken seriously, and you had the feeling that this could happen. But you'd go to these meetings in LA, and from the outset, you would just have the feeling that this was probably not going to happen. That you just weren't being taken seriously. And it was really because of your gender.
It must be very shocking then to get out in the world, in the industry that you love and are confident and want to be in, and then to have that reaction from people.
That's right. Well, it was incredibly frustrating because it was really the first time that I felt like I was in this industry that was really kind of a club, and that I wasn't allowed to be part of that club.
Right. Now, talk a little bit about the terms, lumping women into the whole diversity issue and how you see that.
This is the most important thing that has to be done right now. And this is how I got into such deep trouble in the Directors Guild. First of all, vocabulary matters. Semantics make a difference. Women are not diverse. We're not part of diversity any more than men are. Men make up 49% of the population, and women make up 51% of the population. We are in no way, shape, or form a minority or a diverse group of people. In our majority population, women have many different diverse groups of people. We have all our different sexual variations, religious variations, different races, ethnicities. So we have a great deal of diversity within our category as women, just as men do. But you can't say that women are diverse. Well, the fact that we are referred to, or that we're clumped together in a group called diversity with ethnic minority men disadvantages us terribly.
Now, I gotta admit, I had never heard it put that way. But once she said it, it's like, oh, duh. And then she explained the implication of it by way of a history lesson.
So in 1979, these 6 women, I named them the original 6 some years ago, they were like us now, like they couldn't get work. They hadn't been able to get any work for years, and they got together and they said, look, let's do something about this. Of course, they were coming, at the tail end of the civil rights movement of the 1960s and the women's lib movement of the 1970s. So there was just a general atmosphere of sympathy for this kind of cause, I think much more than I had in the, 2011, 12, 13. But anyway, so they got together and they formed the Women's Steering Committee of the Directors Guild of America in 1979. And they started surreptitiously gathering statistics. And actually there was this guy in the guild who helped them by getting deal memos smuggled out to them. And so they met every weekend, and for a year they counted up all these deal memos and counted up the numbers. And what they found was that the number of women director hires in 1979 was 0.5%.
Wow.
0.05%. And so they took these numbers to a lawyer, and the lawyer said, well, you can do one of two things. You can sue the studios, or you can sue the guild. And so they went to the guild, and there was this terrific guy called Michael Franklin who was running the guild at the time. And they said, look, we talked to this lawyer, and he said we could do, either sue the studios or sue you and sue our guild. And of course the guild didn't want to get sued, and Michael Franklin was also very sympathetic and, thought this was pretty awful. So he got the other leaders of the guild, the national board, and to agree that they really needed to do something about this. And so they started for a couple of years getting women directors in the guild together with studio executives to try to raise the number of hires and to talk about terms and different things that they could do to increase female director hires. But the studio executives were really recalcitrant, and then finally at some point, no studio executives showed up. They had a Saturday morning meeting, and the women directors showed up, and Michael Franklin was there, and nobody showed up from the studios. And Michael Franklin really basically said, that's it, let's sue. And so from it was probably, 1981, they started to, or 82, they started to, collect all the material and statistics and put together a case. And then just before they were going to commence the lawsuit against several studios, some people in the guild became concerned about ethnic minority men and thought they should be also included in the lawsuit. So they asked the women, well, is that okay if we put this on hold just for, a little bit longer and include ethnic minority men in this lawsuit? And the women, of course, said, yes, that would be wonderful. That's also a really important issue. And so it ended up putting the lawsuit on hold for about a year as they gathered all the information that they needed and included it into the suit. So by 1983, they launched the lawsuit, and in 1985, Judge Pamela Reimer made her final ruling on it. And the ruling that she made was that this was a really important lawsuit, and that it was a very viable lawsuit, and that it should be continued. But unfortunately, the Directors Guild of America cannot be the leader. They cannot lead the class in this class action case because they suffer from a conflict of interest. So the conflict of interest, of course, is that in a guild that's run by a vast majority of white men, and it's a guild that's run by directors, they are not in an objective, impartial position to be able to advance the cause of women directors. I mean, you can imagine, if you think about it for a minute, you can't have, in a competitive field like directing, you can't have people who are actively seeking, directors who are actively seeking open assignment jobs at the studios, pretending, even if they're very sincere and they really mean it, going and, negotiating for more female hires. It's like it's a conflict of interest. It's like having a group of people policing a corporation, and they're also employed by that corporation. It doesn't work.
Right.
So Judge Pamela Reimer felt that if women and ethnic minorities wanted to continue with this very important and very viable case, they needed to lead it themselves. that it couldn't be done by the Directors Guild of America. Okay, so what happened that's very significant, two things that happened that are very significant because of this whole case, was number one, ethnic minority men got combined, clumped together with women of all ethnicities henceforward. From 1982, when ethnic minority men got brought into the lawsuit, from that year until this very day, until today, women and ethnic minority men are clumped together in a single diversity mandate.
Because they're the same.
Yeah, well, exactly. They're broken out in terms of statistics when they count up the deal memos and they publish statistical information about female TV about director hires. They break them out into ethnic minority men, white men, ethnic minority females, and white women of color and white women. But in the diversity agreements themselves, they're clumped together in one category. And so what I pointed out to the Directors Guild was that it was absolutely essential that women be broken out into their own distinct category if we were going to see any mitigation to the incredible discrimination that was going on.
Because otherwise they can say, look, we hired 25% minorities, but what they're not telling you is 98% of those minorities were men.
Well, that's right. I mean,
I'm making up the data.
Studios and the studio executives and showrunners can comply with the DGA studio diversity agreements simply by hiring ethnic minority men and not hiring any women at all. And that is exactly what was happening. So, and they like to say that is not true, but listen to the statistics. So ethnic minority men make up 18% of the United States population. Okay, and they direct today about 18% of episodic television. And in 2014, women who make up 51% of the population directed only, I guess it was in 2014, it was 16% or 14%. And women of color who make up 19% of the U.S. population were directing only 2%. So you see that from 1983 to 2014, by having ethnic minority men and women of all ethnicities clumped together in a single diversity mandate, ethnic minority men reached their demographic. They arrived.
Good on them. They did great.
That's right. They did great.
So here's what's puzzling to me. At a time when there has been study after study after study that shows when women are on a board of directors or in top management or at the executive level, that company is more profitable. And knowing that Hollywood is driven by profits, and every studio is now owned by a publicly traded company and has to report to their shareholders, and it really is all about the bottom line. And the data shows that when you have women in high levels, your bottom line is higher. Why still the resistance?
Well, I don't think that has really quite sunk in. You know, if you look at commercials, you know, commercials is the most lucrative category of directing in our industry, in our guild.
Sure.
And I mean, the amounts of the revenues that come in from commercials is just phenomenal, high number. And women direct about 1% of commercials. And I think women of color, practically 0%. So, you know, I think that we haven't had enough women directing to be able to demonstrate categorically. We have lots of examples of it. We've got these movies, and particularly these movies coming out in recent years that women have directed that have made tons and tons of money and been incredibly profitable. But male dominance of the profession is so profound. I mean, really, when you talk about the top 100 most profitable films, women direct 1.5% or 1.9% of those. So it's tiny, like more than 98% of the most profitable films are directed by men. So that when studio executives are making their choices about directors, they don't even want to think about women. And also there's this like deep, rich pool of male directors that they can dig their hands into and pull out all kinds of guys. But the pool of women is so shallow. We haven't been able to, the leaky pipeline is so profoundly full of leaks that you come out of film school at 50-50 gender equity, and then you cannot enter the profession. We really haven't been able to grow a deep, rich group of best women directors that can compete with the best of the best male counterparts. And so it's just, seems to be very slow. And that's why I am a very strong believer in creating an intent. We've been calling it, 50-50 by 2020. Calling for quotas in the United States are illegal. Okay, and affirmative action is very unpopular. So you can't demand that 50-50 gender equity hires in Hollywood categorically. You can't do that. But you can create an intent. And so when we talk about 50-50 by 2020, let's get, by 2020, let's create an intent for Hollywood players. I mean, J.J. Abrams has done it. People are doing it. And this is not pie in the sky science fiction that we could do this. Sweden is doing it, Australia, New Zealand, there are all kinds of countries that are just making this sweeping proclamation that they are going to demand 50-50 gender equity hires in their entertainment industries. And this is very, very important because in the United States of America, the media that we create in Hollywood is one of our most influential global exports. What we send out from our television, our new media, and our films out of the United States of America is affecting people all over the world. And it's making a difference in how people perceive women and girls and boys and men. It really, really is critically important that we have the full story, that we have, half the population, women, are able to communicate their stories and their perspective and disseminate that around the world. It's very important for the United States, in my opinion. It is something that more and more people are talking about just doing individually. And I think if we could get enough big Hollywood players to do what J.J. Abrams did, which is basically that he's going to hire based on demographics. That's something that one can do.
Yeah. Now, I want to ask you, because I know you've been really leading the charge in this fight. And at what personal cost?
Well, the personal cost has been profound because, for one thing, I really pretty much, although I am attached still to projects, to direct, I really have kind of given up pursuing my own directing career to be able to do this. And, it's been completely unpaid. So, I've been living very much hand to mouth over these years, but I'm very, very deeply committed to it and committed to the success of it. I mean, I've invested so much now of my time and my family's time to this pursuit that I have to make it pay off. I have to see it through to the end. I'm really, really excited about what has happened.
What is happening with the EEOC right now?
Well, let's see. So the EEOC is about, I think it was October 2nd, 2015, they started the investigation officially and have been interviewing women. I believe hundreds of women have come forward and spoken to them. And I think they're wrapping that part of it up now. I think they have done enough of that to be able to move on to another step in this, or a series of steps. They are confidential organizations, so I'm not privy to what those decisions are, but I'm very, very much hoping that the next step is going to be leading to legal action. I'm hoping that they will subpoena executives and agency heads and agents and guild people and leaders and, producers, and that they will move as quickly as possible toward really, mass industry-wide class action lawsuit.
Now, are they just looking at directors, or are they looking at all positions?
Only directors. And this was very important for me, because when I started this in the Directors Guild, first a lot of women who were in the Directors Guild are not director members. They're, ADs and second ADs and UPMs and so forth. And they were saying, well, include us, and, we're part of the guild too. This is important. And then also friends of mine who have such a valid point were saying, look, we're screenwriters, we're cinematographers, we're composers, we include us too, and so forth. But I felt that it was very important just to stick to create a really solid spearhead to this hopefully much greater effort of just directors. Because the role of the director is really to create the vision, to communicate, to tell the story, communicate the perspective that really becomes an enormously large part of the very voice of our civilization. So if we can make that argument very clear to people, that when you discriminate against women directors, you are effectively silencing and censoring half of the population. And if we could make that argument just absolutely clear and ironclad to people, and to talk about it in terms of its global resonance and its, relevance to all aspects of American society and our standing in the world. So I felt that if we could make that point, and it's kind of small enough for somebody like, the ACLU or the EEOC to then be able to really dig their teeth into and take it on. And so that was what I really decided to do.
So she took it to the ACLU.
I met with them 2 or 3 times for pretty lengthy sessions, and I sent them many, many documents. And they really just understood the whole thing. They got it, the significance of it, and why this is so critically important. And so they're the ones then who were able to, they had the resources and the staff and be able to do all the research and hire statisticians and do investigation. And at the same time, they started a media campaign and so forth.
So the investigation by the EEOC has commenced and it is underway, and the expectation from this group is that it will result in legal action. But what does that mean for everybody else?
And I do talk to a lot of female executives at studios as part of this, and just in my life and in my line of work. And a lot of them, are also frustrated with their own career trajectory and with the boys club. And, so many people have said it's a club and I'm not invited. So it's so interesting you said that too. And they're also trying to do their part of putting forward women and championing women and trying to get women in all the categories. But it sounds like they're also going to be swept up in, any potential lawsuit, because they are still part of the machine.
Yeah, that's right. Well, they have to get over a certain threshold. They say that, all these people say, well, there aren't that many women directors out there. Well, we know there are thousands of us out there who are trained and have proven ourselves and so forth. There are 1,350, women director members of the Directors Guild. You don't get into the Directors Guild because you knocked on the door and said you wanted to become a part of it. Mm-hmm. You get in there because you get a professional directing job, and you have to join the guild to be able to do it. And so all of us who are directors in the Directors Guild have worked professionally. And if we've worked professionally, we've probably stepped over some pretty goddamn big obstacles to get there, because women really are shut out. And so if we've been, through 5 years of graduate film school and have directed a feature or two and have got a little bit of television, or we haven't directed a feature but we've directed TV or something, we've probably made a lot of shorts. We probably have quite a lot of experience, and that is the case. There are 1,300, at least, women director members of the Directors Guild of America who are ready to go to work right now. But a lot of us haven't worked for a long time. And the Directors Guild have imposed, and this is a problem of having basically, lawyers and accountants running the Directors Guild of America, from the administrative standpoint, they imposed this thing called the working in the trade rule, wherein if you haven't directed for 30 days in 7 years, you are no longer working in the trade. And if you're no longer working in the trade, you can't take positions in governance, and you can't take part in many of the so-called diversity programs, and they had different things going on. But if you hadn't worked in that period of time, you were basically considered out of the trade. You were no longer working in the trade, which is so incredible because anybody who's a feature film director spends their entire life basically 24/7 working on all kinds of different projects in development and trying to get financing and writing screenplays and doing all the different things that we do every single day to be able to hopefully get work. I mean, Terrence Malick, for example, didn't work from 1979 to 1999. 20 years. And I know because I was living next door to him in Beverly Hills for 13 of those years, and I can tell you that he was not having a good time. He was not working for 20 years because he didn't feel like it, because he was doing something rather enjoyable. He was, in this 2-bedroom apartment, across the alley from me, and he was wanting to be directing. But nobody said he's no longer working in the trade. He was working on trying to get financed on different projects, and finally he did. And then he's made one masterpiece after another. I think Catherine Bigelow was just a few months away from being no longer working the trade. She didn't get work for 6 years. You look at any of these women, Julie Dash, she went for many years of not being able to get work after making that beautiful Daughters of the Dust. I mean, there are so many incredible women. I refer to them as a lost generation. I mean, I consider myself to be a part of a lost generation of women directors who from 1995 to 2015, thanks in large part to the Directors Guild and their diversity agreements that have been so damaging to women's abilities to advance themselves professionally, none of us were able to get work. And all of those incredible films and projects and stories are not told. They're not part of our collective consciousness. They're not there to be able to see. And, it really is just, it's devastating how that will, resonate going forward. That great lapse, that great loss is there are all these wonderful women coming up in the late 70s and early 80s, and up until the beginning, middle of the 90s, until we hit that peak in 95, and they just got just snuffed out, just shut down.
So it's not just about jobs; it's so much bigger than that.
It's huge. It's so huge. I mean, it really is. I mean, there's a reason that this has become the massive avalanche in global media in the United States, on social media, in the mainstream media. And it's because people understand how important this is. People understand. I mean, the wonderful TED Talk by Jimmy Carter, in which he called this issue, the issue of women, is the most important issue that exists in the world today in terms of our civilization moving forward.
So if, I'm going to say when the EEOC is successful, what does that look like?
The EEOC is going to be successful when they have filed a massive industry-wide class action lawsuit against Hollywood as an industry for gender discrimination based on Title VII.
And then what do you want the outcome to be after that? Does it change policies? Does it change how people hire? Does it put in quotas? Like, what is that?
Yeah, so I don't think they can put in quotas, but I think that they can force those most recalcitrant people to step in line with, scaring them where they're most vulnerable, which is their bank accounts and their wallets and their pocketbooks. That is the way change gets made. So I wanted to tell you to follow up. So the original 6 found that the number of women director hires in 1979 was 0.5%, 0.05%. And from the lawsuit in 1983 to 1995, when we hit our height, that number, because of the legal action, because of the work they did, because of the legal action that they got the Directors Guild to do, just having initiated the legal action, just initiating that class action lawsuit, sent the number of women directors in 10 years, from 1985 to 1995, from 0.5% to 16%. Imagine if we had kept going on that trajectory. If that had been able to go on, we would be very close to parity.
Considering that 20-year gap, 50-50 by 2020 is obviously ambitious.
Well, it's ambitious unless you realize that all it takes is a decision. I mean, when Carrie Putnam, the head of Sundance Film Festival, selected, and I'm sure she's right that she did it based on merit, that her decisions were meritocracy based, that she selected 8 films directed by women and 8 films directed by men for their feature lineup in competition in 2013. So that was a decision. She made that decision. When J.J. Abrams says that he's going to hire 51% women and 50% men in all of the different areas of his hiring, that's making a sweeping decision. All you have to do is make the choice. If people would voluntarily just do the right thing and voluntarily institute gender equity and encourage their friends, other Hollywood players to do the same, and if enough big people did it, if Spielberg and the big, huge Hollywood players like him would make this statement and make this announcement that they were going to do that, then, everybody else would get kind of shamed into doing it too, or they would want to do it. And
right. Then it doesn't have to be incremental. It can just happen.
It can just happen. It really is not a matter of having to do things incrementally. All these women are saying, really you should just be asking for 1% a year. Well, the hell with 1% a year. What they really should do, if you want it to be really fair, is let women direct 99% of films and television shows and new media for the next 100 years, and then see where we're at.
It's like Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, someone asked her what the right number of women was for the Supreme Court, and she said 9.
9. I love her. She's right. Oh, it's so true. That is the right number, and we have been held back for so long as a sex, and, they should be so lucky to be just 50-50 as far as I'm concerned.
That's enough already.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it has been, at the same time, incredibly depressing and such a pleasure.
It has. It really has been a pleasure.
You've been listening to The Other 50%. I'm Julie Harris Walker. I'd like to thank Maria Giese for sharing her story and for sharing the story. And special thanks to Jonathan Lucas for editing, Jay Rowe, Danny Rosner, and Allison McQuaid for the music. Please find us on iTunes and subscribe and leave a review, and on our website, theother50%.com, all spelled out, for added features and bios of our guests. Thanks for listening. See you next time.
Yeah, well, listen, it's depressing, but if we can make the change happen, and I believe we can, then it's no longer depressing. It's a revolution.